Bon dia, welcome to Exploring Timor-Leste, the podcast that talks about Southeast Asia's best-kept travel secret. I'm your host Jonty, and I'll share first-hand insights, expert interviews and practical travel tips. Whether you're a traveller, a culture lover or just curious about places rarely covered in the mainstream, you're in the right place. Let's explore Timor-Leste. Welcome to the first episode of the Exploring Timor-Leste podcast. In this, I will give you a brief overview of Timor-Leste, as most people have not heard of the country, although if you found this podcast, you probably have some inkling of what to expect. And then I'm going to talk about 10 incredible experiences you can have in Timor-Leste, which will hopefully whet your appetite for the rest of the series. The intention with the rest of the series is to really drill down into specific places within Timor-Leste, for example, Dili or Atauru Island, talk about some of the incredible activities like the snorkeling and diving and the hiking, and I'm also going to interview locals and expats who know this country so well. Timor-Leste is a small country in Southeast Asia. It is a 1 hour's flight north of Darwin at the top of Australia, and it is about half of the island of Timor, shared with Indonesia, its much larger neighbour to the west. Timor-Leste has had a somewhat traumatic history. It was under colonisation from the Portuguese for hundreds of years before being invaded by the Japanese during World War II. Then the Portuguese regained control, and after they left in 1975, the Indonesians invaded and occupied the country for the next 24 years. So it's had quite a brutal history, but the people are very resilient, and it is a vibrant and young and exciting new country, and somewhere that is rarely visited by tourists, but hopefully that will change over the coming years. For half of a small island, it has a remarkably varied geography, with mountains up to 3,000 metres above sea level and beautiful beaches and coral reefs around its shores. The capital city is Dili, which is a relatively bustling place by Timor-Leste standards, but pretty quiet compared to the other capitals in Southeast Asia. An interesting fact about Timor-Leste, it is the second most Catholic country in the world after the Vatican. So obviously the Vatican is 100% Catholic, but it is only home to about 800 people. Timor-Leste is 98% Catholic out of the 1.3 million population. So we expect to see lots of churches and lots of festivals around important dates in the Catholic calendar. To give a little bit of background on myself, I spent a year living in Dili in Timor-Leste between 2024 and 2025. I was volunteering through VSA, Volunteer Service Abroad, which is a New Zealand NGO, with a local NGO, Hamnasa, and with the Ministry of Tourism. I really enjoyed my experience in Timor-Leste. I wrote 5 books, a guidebook, a hiking guide, and 3 photography books, and created lots of social media content. And this podcast is another way of getting the story out about Timor-Leste and what an incredible place it is for people to visit. After that brief introduction, I'm going to talk to you about 10 incredible experiences you can have in Timor-Leste, which will give you a flavour for what the country can offer. These are in no particular order, but starting with snorkeling and diving, particularly around Atauru Island. Atauru Island is about 1.5 hours by ferry from Dili, or only a 15-minute flight, and the reefs around it are some of the most biodiverse reefs in the world. They found hundreds of different species of fish, and the coral is renowned for being particularly healthy and colourful and varied, and it is a wonderful place to go snorkeling and diving. The reefs are just offshore, so you can literally walk in off the beach and go snorkeling, although the best reefs tend to be about a 5 minutes boat journey on a small fishing boat with one of the locals. And it's the closest that Timor-Leste comes to having a tourist destination. So there are a number, like 3 resorts on the island, which are not your sort of 4-star, 5-star resorts. They're pretty basic, but they've got a lot of charm, and you definitely have a very authentic experience visiting the island. Number 2 is to watch the sunrise from the summit of Mount Ramelau. Mount Ramelau is the highest peak in Timor-Leste at 2,986 metres above sea level, so it's higher than any point in mainland Australia. Expect to spend 2 to 3 hours to reach the summit, and then another 1 or 2 hours down. The path is relatively clear and straightforward, but it is going up a large hill, so some effort is required. You're rewarded with fantastic views. On a clear day, you can see pretty much the entire country from the north coast to the south coast, so it's an unforgettable experience for those who like to go for a walk. Number 3 is Akusi. This is an enclave completely surrounded by West Timor, which is part of Indonesia. It's accessible by plane or by ferry from Dili. And in a quite an off-the-beaten-track country, this is even more off-the-beaten-track, so very few people visit Akusi, but it is one of the most attractive parts of the country, in my opinion. It's where the Portuguese first landed in 1515. It is one of the cleanest and quietest places in Timor-Leste. It has very good infrastructure, there are far fewer potholes, and things seem to work well there. Akusi has a fantastic coastline with beaches and beautiful blue waters, and then behind that rises hills and mountains, which are incredibly kind of steep and rugged and just very photogenic and interesting to look at, and it's just a very interesting place to visit. Number 4 is Balcao, which is the second city in Timor-Leste, although it is about a 15th of the size of Dili. So there's a big difference between the capital and Balcao. Balcao has some of the best preserved Portuguese colonial buildings in the country, including the beautiful old market. It is famous, if I can use that word, for the swimming pool, which is quite unusual. So it has a beautiful natural spring-fed pool, which is well worth a visit. Number 5 is to visit an Umalulik. You will see these pretty much everywhere in Timor-Leste, particularly once you get outside of Dili. These are traditional Timorese sacred buildings where festivals related to the harvest and other pre-Catholic cultural practices are held. Their design varies quite significantly around Timor-Leste, but they're quite distinctive and often raised off the ground and have a motif or symbols at the top of the roof structure. And they're interesting both kind of architecturally and also culturally, and they give you a good insight into traditional Timorese practices. Number 6 is understanding Timor-Leste's long struggle for independence. So, as I mentioned earlier, Timor-Leste was colonized, it was occupied, it has had quite a challenge to become an independent country. To understand this history better, there's a couple of places I would recommend. One is the National Resistance Museum in Dili, which gives a good history of Timor-Leste, particularly under occupation by Indonesia. And then there is the Shager exhibition, which is also in Dili, which is held in the old prison, which is quite a confronting place. It recently had a major upgrade at the end of 2024. It was good before, but now it's even better in terms of telling the story of those who suffered in the prison and during the occupation. 7 is to go hiking in Timor-Leste. And I will talk about this on a number of following podcasts, but Timor-Leste really has something for everybody, as long as you can cope with the heat and humidity. But there are amazing day walks in both Dili and Ataru Island, and there are some phenomenal multi-day hikes, up to 8-day epics crossing the whole country from coast to coast. Timor-Leste, to my mind, is one of the great undiscovered hiking destinations. Local guides are near essential to avoid getting lost, but they are worthwhile to be able to explore the huge variety of landscapes, explore the local cultures, and enjoy some of the most spectacular scenery in Southeast Asia. Number 8 is to visit Cristo Rei, which is the icon of Timor-Leste. This is one of the largest statues of Jesus in the world. It is in Dili at the eastern end and a beautiful location at the top of Cape Futukama. You'll get amazing views of both the statue and also looking out across the coastline of Dili. And afterwards you can go for a dip or a snorkel at Bat Beach, which is on the other side of the peninsula. Number 9 is to explore the history of Balibo. This is probably best known in Australia for the Balibo 5. These were 5 Australian-based journalists, so they were a mixture of Australians, Kiwis and British, and they were murdered by the Indonesian army in 1975 when they invaded. Balibo is home to the second oldest fort in the country, which is now one of the best hotels in the country. So probably the only place with an infinity pool in Timor-Leste, and it's a lovely place to spend a few days. It is also home to the Balibo Veterans Museum, which tells in detail the struggle against the occupation from Indonesia. There's also the Flag House Museum and there's local walks and caves to explore. Number 10 is to take a scenic flight. So Timor-Leste the landscape is quite rugged and can be quite challenging to get around by vehicle. It's all doable, but it can take some time. It might be a bit bumpy, and particularly during the wet season, some roads may be inaccessible. Probably the most comfortable way to explore Timor-Leste is from the air. There is an organisation called Mission Aviation Fellowships, MAF, M-A-F, and they operate in a number of poor countries providing medical support, a bit like the Flying Doctors in Australia. They provide an important service in Timor-Leste connecting the country, and they subsidise their medical services with running scheduled flights. So this is a great way to get from A to B across Timor-Leste, and invariably you'll get spectacular views. So particularly the flights from Dili to Samay or to Shuai, where you're flying across the mountainous spine of the island, are particularly scenic, and also flights out to Ataru Island are very pleasant as well. So that is a good way of seeing the country from a different perspective. Hopefully those 10 experiences have given you an idea for the range of things that you can do in Timor-Leste. If you're interested in knowing more about Timor-Leste, please do follow this podcast and watch out for future episodes where I drill into these areas in a lot more detail than I've been able to do so today. Thank you so much for listening to Exploring Timor-Leste. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a rating or a review. It really helps more people discover the show. If you have any questions or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. Drop me an email at exploringtimorleste@gmail.com. Until next time, obrigado ho adeus.